Hello, I'd like to welcome you to our April Fireside Chat for our Design of Experiments MOOC. I'm Doug Montgomery. I'm the primary instructor in the course, and hopefully, if you've been watching things, you know that we run these Fireside Chats once a month. And I always have a guest speaker to come, and we talk about specific topics. Some of them related to design of experiments, some of them in more general topics on statistics. This is our final live Fireside Chat for the spring. We will start up again in the fall, probably in August. I think we're looking at scheduling one for August. The way we run these, in case you're new, is our guest always gives a talk about something that's, I think, going to be really interesting. And then we have some time at the end for Q&A. And we usually get some questions in advance. I think we have about a half a dozen or so questions that have already come in. But this is a great time for you to ask questions about anything you want. You can ask about the topics in the course itself. If there's some specific situation that you're interested in talking about, please ask the question. If there's something our guest talks about that gets you excited and you want to ask about that, please do that too. For those of you that are in the Coursera course, we post these Fireside Chat recordings to the course, and you can find them in the Resources tab of your Coursera course. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of background about what we're going to do. One thing I will ask you to remember is to please keep your mics muted and your cameras off during the session. Just to avoid any sort of electronic confusion, okay? And if you do have a question that occurs to you during the chat, please use the chat function on the Zoom menu to do that. And you can do that anytime you want. You don't have to wait until the question and answer period begins to start that. You can do it anytime. And we'll try to get to all of these questions during our scheduled Fireside Chat. But if we don't, we'll try to get to them offline, and you'll get a response in Coursera for those of you that are enrolled in the program. Okay, so I'd like to now introduce our guest. Our guest is Dr. Sally Morton, and she is a very well-known statistician, and we're quite lucky to have her here at ASU. She's the Executive Vice President of our Knowledge Enterprise, and in that role, she advances the university's research priorities, drives things like corporate engagement, economic development, our global initiatives, strategic partnership, technology transfer, lots of really interesting and important things. And her career has spanned both the academic world and industry. Before she came to ASU, she was the dean of the Virginia Tech College of Science and interim director of the Fralin Life Sciences Institute. And we were very lucky to have stolen her from Virginia Tech. My old alma mater, our loss, or their loss, our gain. Sally is recognized broadly in the use of data science in healthcare. And she has a real focus on patient-centered outcomes research, solving problems that patients themselves identify, improving healthcare systems, and to allow patients or families and providers to make better healthcare decisions. In addition to her responsibilities as the leader of our Knowledge Enterprise operation, she's also a professor in the College of Health Solutions and the School of Mathematics and Statistical Science. And she holds the Florence Ely Nelson Chair. She joined ASU in February of 21. Sally holds a undergraduate degree in mathematics, a master's and PhD from Stanford University. She also has a master's in statistics from the London School of Economics. And she's also had other academic and industrial appointments. I think I first really ran into her when she was the head of the statistics program at Rand Corporation. And she did a great job there and moved on there to Virginia Tech. She's really a really talented person. And I'm really pleased that she was able to take time out of her incredibly busy schedule to come over and talk with us today. So Sally, thank you very much. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Doug, for that really kind introduction. I'm honored to be here today with you. I'm not going to talk about design of experiments. I'm actually going to talk about statistical leadership and hopefully share some lessons that I've learned along the way. And actually, I'm still learning on this journey. And hopefully we'll get some questions about this topic. Apologies, there we go. So I thought if I would start with sort of some immediate thoughts for the audience. The first thing is that I believe statisticians can and should be leaders. I think we're particularly well trained for this role. We think about data, we think about making evidence-based decisions, particularly with the world awash with data. So I hope wherever you are in your career, you'll think about becoming a leader. In fact, you're probably a leader now. It may not be in a leadership role as we usually think about them, but statisticians can, and I think we should be leaders. I think the world needs us. The second bullet there, honesty and hope. So as Doug said, I used to be Dean of the College of Science at Virginia Tech. I was there when the pandemic began. I've tried as a leader to always be transparent in communication. It was very stressful as a leader. It was stressful for all of us, and I didn't quite know how to lead in that context. I always thought about being honest as a leader and direct. I happened to be out for a long walk. I'm a swimmer, and the pool was shut down, so I went out for long walks, and I was by a garden, and a child had put a sign in the garden, and it said hope. And so I decided I would try to lead with honesty and hope. As a leader in the pandemic, and that stood me in good stead ever since. That last bullet there is a statement from the military, actually. We always think about mission and vision first, but always remember that people are really all that matter when we're leaders. That's our only currency. So just some initial thoughts to start with. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my career, which Doug was kind enough to allude to. I got my PhD at Stanford, and there you can see my path. I'm actually making my way back across the United States. I started as head of the RAND Statistics Group. RAND is a public policy private think tank. I work in health policy. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. I then was vice president of statistics and epidemiology at RTI Research Triangle Institute, now called RTI International in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. I then, across the chasm, that's the picture in the lower right, the chasm between industry and academics. I sometimes get questions from audiences when I speak about leadership about how you jump across that chasm. I'd be happy to answer questions about that today. I was chair of biostatistics, the biostatistics department at the University of Pittsburgh. I then went to Virginia Tech, and now I'm at ASU making my way back across the country. And I was really honored to be the 2009 American Statistical Association president, almost 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago today. So I often get asked, what is knowledge enterprise, the job that I have right now? We think about knowledge enterprise here at Arizona State University as really a mindset across the entire university. How do we generate knowledge? How do we empower ourselves, train our students in particular to solve humanity's greatest challenges? And this pervades the entire university. In knowledge enterprise, we are of service to our faculty, students, and staff. Our job is to support research across the entire university. We do that in ways like we at core facilities are part of knowledge enterprise. We run the university's research institutes, for example. We do research compliance and integrity, technology transfer, as Doug alluded to. We also have corporate engagement. It's a very exciting place on the university, and our job is to be of service and support research across the university from idea generation all the way to dissemination and translation into practice. And I always think about the words from the ASU charter that pertain to research. We do research of public value that is accountable to the communities that we serve. So I'm really an administrator, but what do I do besides be an administrator? And you heard a little bit about this. My research is in health policy. I've worked the last 25, 30 years in what's called evidence-based medicine. particularly research synthesis, where we look at past research that's been done and we ask, how can we combine that research? And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, to answer questions that really matter to patients and their families. I do a lot of advising now at this stage in my career. I'm on the board of scientific counselors for the National Center for Health Statistics. I work on the methodology committee for the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, PCORI, which grew out of healthcare reform. And I'm also, the last 3 years, have worked for the National Collaborative on Gun Violence Research. I think, again, these are very important topics for our nation and for the world, and statisticians can really play an important role in giving advice to the nation. Down the bottom of the slide, you see some recent papers that I've worked on. You can see there, for example, the bottom paper, cost of interventions to increase flu vaccines. Do a lot of work on that. How do we think about increasing the uptake of flu vaccines? What has worked in different programs that have been done? How can we help advise healthcare providers and others who are trying to get the uptake of flu vaccines? And then you see some technical papers. That biometric paper, testing small study effects and multivariate meta-analysis, I'm delighted to say, just won the International Biometric Society Best Paper Award. And that's really a delight because the lead author, Chuan Hong, is actually a student. She's now moved on to a job, and it's wonderful to see students really succeed in this way. The bottom right, I only have 2 books in compared to Doug's 14. I heard about this moment. I'm a little bit behind. I need to move forward. This is a book that I co-edited on methods in comparative effectiveness research. Comparative effectiveness research asks the question, what works best for whom and under what circumstances? So I think a little bit about that. I did want to say something just for a moment on meta-analysis, where I've spent a lot of my time. If you haven't heard about this, this is where we look for studies that have addressed a particular question. For example, does ibuprofen work better than aspirin in reducing headaches? So you might look at all randomized controlled trials that have studied that question, and you ask the question, can you put them together some way statistically, aggregate the data across, say, those 5 studies that we have on the slide? And then why would we want to do this? We can increase statistical power because we now just not only have the patients in 1 study, we have the patients in all 5 studies. We can summarize the findings across those studies. We can also investigate what we call heterogeneity. Maybe 1 study was conducted in rural areas and others were conducted in a city. Are the results different? Maybe 1 was conducted on only women patients and the other only looked at men. Do these drugs work differently by gender? So it's a way to look at retrospectively at studies that have been conducted and combine them and look forward to answer questions. I thought a little bit about design of experiment questions in this context. There's actually a pretty interesting meta-analysis methodology called prospective meta-analysis. So what I've talked about here is retrospective analysis. We look at studies that have already been conducted, but it's very interesting to ask the question, what studies should we conduct now to add to the weight of evidence that already exists? And oftentimes when we design an experiment, we don't look so much, how much will this add to the body of knowledge that we already know from a statistical perspective? So that's kind of an interesting, I think, related to design of experiments.
Yeah, just
question.
I'll interrupt you for just a minute.
Please.
That is a very good idea. And in fact, I have seen places where people have done the retrospective analysis, where they have a series of experiments that have been run, perhaps in different locations or on different pieces of equipment.
Right.
And you know, the equipment might differ in some fairly minor way. You know, it might be an annealing furnace in semiconductor manufacturing. They have several different types of these tubes, but you know, do we get similar results across this? And meta-analysis is a classic way to think about combining the results of those experiments, and it's a very very powerful idea. By the way, we don't talk about this in the course, so this is something that if you want to learn something about, you're going to have to You're going to have to dig into the weeds after this course is over and find
Right.
some things to read, but it's a very important topic.
And also, when you're a meta-analyst, you cannot design the studies that have already been conducted. You're stuck with whatever design
Yep.
they have. They may be observational, they may be randomized trials. I find the thought experiment, what would the optimal design have been to answer the question that I want to answer, a very interesting, again, this thought experiment to do. So I would counsel our students to think about that as you start a new study. Really think to yourself, what is the optimal thing that I would do, and what am I maybe constrained to do for whatever reason? So I'm now going to move to kind of leadership. So I'm often asked, what is leadership? And there's one definition. This comes from a book by Peter Northouse, which I really like. I think leadership is a prerequisite for statistics to grow. We're often trained as statisticians and we keep ourselves around the sides of the table. We need to step up and really be at the head of the table. Again, I think statisticians are very well trained to be leaders in all types of setting. I've been a leader in industry and academics, and we're needed now to answer the questions of interest. So as I thought about being a leader there was at Rand, I became head of the statistics group. I asked someone that I really admired. And so another important lesson, always have mentors and ask questions. This is someone that I really admired at Rand named Natalie Crawford. I don't know if you ever ran into her. She was head of Project Air Force at Rand for a long time. And she was a leader that I admired. And I asked her, what advice do you have for me? Well, I'll go to the second bullet. The first thing she said is follow the money. Always understand how much money you have, how you can get more money, where does it come from, what can you spend it on? It's very important to know. The first bullet is very, very important. She said, as a leader, always think one level above where you are. So I lead knowledge enterprise at ASU and I want it to succeed, but I should always think about what serves Arizona State University best, not what is best for knowledge enterprise. If you do that, you will always make the right decisions for your institution. It may mean that knowledge enterprise may not get the resources. They're better used elsewhere, but that is what is best for ASU. And then the bottom bullet, always understand how your institution works. And I'll say a little bit about that as we move through. So money matters. You know, I worked at nonprofits, RTI and RAND are both nonprofits, but they still need to have money. Resources are needed to lead. I think at times scientists, especially in the academic setting, oh, let's not talk about money. That's not my responsibility. But it's really, really important, particularly as a leader, to understand how you can attain resources, how you contribute to the financial health of your institution. And I found as a leader, be transparent. There's a picture of cookies, because I've found cookies, whether they're literal or figurative, are very important. You have a seminar series, you want people to come, have cookies, they will come. But important to think about what are the incentives for people, the people that you lead, what will make them interested. And often it's about resources. And again, be transparent in how you distribute resources. Finance, understand the finances of your organization. You're already good at math, you're a statistician, this will be easy. You have to spend money to make money. I found all I do at Knowledge Enterprise, try to increase the research expenditures of ASU. I got to spend money to do that. Take risks. Otherwise, you know, it's no fun. So get out there and take risks. Down at the bottom, University of Pittsburgh, I was very, very surprised when I became an academic. Many faculty did not understand the indirect cost rates, how grants were funded, what the fringe benefits rates were. Understand the financial model of your institution, no matter what level you're at, because you need to contribute to it, you need to understand it. Metrics matter. So really understanding, what does your organization do? What are the goals? How do you fit into it? How are they measured? Who's your customer? What's your product? Now on the right side, a little bit more, when I was chair of Department of Biostat at University of Pittsburgh, people said, we don't have a customer, we don't have a product. Of course we do. Our product is our students. Our product is our research. We have many different customers, funding agencies, other departments. We served other departments, particularly in the medical school. Our students worked on their projects, our faculty worked on them. We produced a product, our collaborative research, our methodological research, our service. So these words may feel very much like a business, and in academics, we aren't a business, but it is important to really understand how your organization works. As a statistician, again, measurement, metric decisions, we're already good at this. This is how the world works. We can lead, but understand metrics. Human resources, another word that words people don't want to be involved in. I want nothing to do with that. Why do we have human resources? Why do we have policies? They are to ensure that everyone is treated equally. That is why they exist. So you should understand them, understand the expectations that other people have, that you are leading, that are in your group, your expectations. Learn how to do a performance review, how to do a good one, how to sit down with a person and say, this is your performance review. Here are the metrics. How can I work with you to help you improve? These are all important skills to learn as you begin a path of leadership. And there's the ASU charter there on the stone where it sits right close to my office. Organizational acumen. This means understanding really how your organization works. I've talked about some pieces of that, finance, human resources, but understanding the organizational chart. You should know where you are in the organizational chart, who you report to. I sometimes will give talk to students, and I'll put the picture of the president of the university on the slide, and I'll say, do you know who this is? And often the students don't. You should know who leads your organization. Here at ASU, we're led by President Michael Crow. We know that, we know who he is, we know what his goals are and where we fit in that organization. Now, there's the org chart on the wall and there is the real organizational chart. So it is important to know who's friends with whom, who's with somebody's thesis advisor, whose kids go to the same school, who's married to whom. When I was dean of the College of Science at Virginia Tech, I had a department, it will be nameless. It had 6 married couples in it, and none of the people shared the same name. Very, very important to know. So when you're having conversations, you can be aware of who's connected to whom. You need to understand motivation and incentives. I've got a couple pictures there. We often think when we listen, we're listening with our ears, which is very, very important. Communication, not just about speaking at someone, but also listening. We also need to listen with our eyes. When I'm in a room with people in a meeting, I'm looking around. How are people responding to what's being said? What is their physical, the way their body movement, their body communication? It's really important to watch with your eyes, understand how things are being said. I had a boss, when he was done, he would just sit back like this. He's a 6'11" guy, so he'd stretch out like this. That was it, that was done. No more conversation, move on. So you need to really think about how people are engaging. Okay, branding and strategic planning. Strategic planning, again, a word that people say, waste of time, a big book that sits on the wall. I've actually found strategic plans incredibly useful. On the slide there, you can see the strategic plan for the American Statistical Association. When I was president, they had a new plan. It fit on one piece of paper, front and back. I would go to committee meetings as president, whatever the committee was on minorities in statistics. I would say, this is where you fit on the plan. We're all working together to succeed with this plan. So a plan that is very clear and that is a vibrant, dynamic document that everyone adheres to, you talk about, it's part of everyday conversation. Really, really important. SWOT, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, something you should do about your organization. Plan your work and work your plan. Branding. Again, knowing who you are on the left side of the slide, that is a statement that I made up when I became Dean of the College of Science at Virginia Tech with some help. Science leaders who discover, create, inspire, and inform. And every single time I spoke about the college, I would say, we are science leaders who discover, create, inspire, and inform. So everybody knew who we were. Arizona State University, I'm head of knowledge enterprise. I've started to say we are changing the way the world solves problems, because I think we don't solve problems quick enough. They're very large, complex problems. We need to solve them in a transdisciplinary way. Bottom right of the slide, know your strengths. So this is the Golden Gate Bridge. I've actually swum underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, done that swim a couple times. As a leader, I'm usually, when we get to a river, body of water, a challenge, I'm never the person who says, build the bridge. I'm not kind of the ideas person. But once you say build the bridge, I'm really good at getting the bridge built, getting everybody across it safely, and usually doing it under budget. So know what your strengths are. That's really, really important as you move through your career, and particularly through leadership. I said this before, people are all that matter. When I first started as a leader, I thought it was about, policies, procedures, anybody could lead. It didn't really, just make it work as a machine. But actually, if you don't have good people and you don't believe in them and they believe in you, you can't get anything done. This is the College of Science at Virginia Tech, which I was honored to lead. And we had all sorts of wonderful people there, staff, faculty, and undergraduate and graduate students. People are all that matter in any leadership position, in my esteem. Talked a little bit about leading. Something I learned early in my career is a concept called manage up. You always think of being managed down, the person managing you. Think about how you manage the person above you. And these are pictures of chairs. If you're in a department, what sort of chair is your chair of the department? How do they like to communicate? Do they like an email, to drop by their office, give them a phone call? Think about what do they need to be successful in their job, learn how to manage up. Don't forget the elevator conversation. So I used to always think about this when I was chair of the biostat department. I still think about it now. I do not want President Michael Crow, who I report to in this job, to get on an elevator and an Arizona Board of Regents member get on. And that Board of Regents member say, Michael, what is knowledge enterprising doing? And it could be some bad thing. It could be a great thing. I just saw that knowledge enterprise did X. What do you know about it? It's my job to make sure that when Dr. Crow gets on that elevator, he is aware of the good and the bad. So often that's the first phone call that I'll make. If something good happens or we're in trouble with something, my job to keep him informed. Think about where you want that elevator to take you. So closing up here. So why lead? You're a statistician, you're an N of 1 right now. I think when you're a leader, you move to actually impacting others and supporting them. And I think you can have a greater impact in that way. I think we are often too constrained in our definition of a statistician. Statisticians do this one thing. They analyze data in this way, and then they give the results to someone else. I think we have to think broadly about what statisticians do. Statisticians are needed everywhere in all types of roles. So think about what your definition of a statistician is, what you would like to do. Set your path and periodically reevaluate it with mentors. I've been working for close to 35 years. I still have mentors. I ask for their help. How am I doing? What could I be doing better? What advice do you have? I've always tried, even though I've moved into leadership roles, to always keep doing statistics. I do it because it's fun. I like doing statistics. I think I have something still to give, but I also think I lead scientists. And to have empathy, to understand what they're doing, and also, frankly, to garner their respect. I think continuing to be statistician, continuing to be scientist is good. And it grounds you. You're reminded of the challenges that those people that you're leading and supporting face every day. Make my job easy. So I once gave a talk to department chairs at the joint stat meetings when I was a dean, and I was asked by the chairs, what do deans want chairs to do? And I said, make my job easy. And what I mean by that is I often get people and they bring up me a problem. Here's the problem, do something. What I would prefer, if possible, is they bring me a problem and then they say, Sally, I've got a couple ideas how to solve it. Here's 2 options. This one costs more, this one less, or whatever. Or maybe you just come and say, you know what, Sally, I don't know how to solve this. Could you help me? But try to make my job easy as a leader. If you do that, you'll actually get me to move in a direction that I think would assist you as well. The last bullet there are just some words that I think about as a leader. I try to think about vision, strategy, tactics. I think about decision-making. I don't think you can be an effective leader if you are unable to make decisions. And sometimes we see people that get stuck and they're just paralyzed. They don't make decisions. Now, the challenge is not to make decisions too quickly. I'm a little bit of an impatient person, and I have to always remind myself, maybe we can wait here and make a decision later. Inclusion, diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity. These are important to always think about as a leader. Are you making sure that everyone who is capable of contributing is at the table included and feels that he or she or they belong to the conversation and to the progress of your unit? Two-way communication, again, I found as a leader, it's not just about me giving town halls, it's about me walking around in hallways, trying to meet people. That's really, really important. Collaboration, collegiality, compromise, something I'm still trying to learn to do, but an important part of leadership. Professionalism and action. Take action as a leader. There often isn't a best solution, and I have to try to kind of make a decision and move on. And it's important to do that. But again, that tension, when is the right time? So again, leaving with you, don't forget your potential to impact, no matter what level you're at. You can lead by example. So I think I'll stop there and say thank you very much.
Sally, thank you for agreeing to spend some time with us. And there's a lot of valuable insights in this talk of yours. And a lot of the people taking this Coursera course are people that probably are already in leadership positions within their organization, or they're preparing themselves to move into those kinds of positions, because they probably wouldn't be taking this course unless they were interested in self-improvement. And we have, for example, here in the school that I'm in, we have a very successful graduate Master of Engineering program in engineering management. And a lot of the people that are in that program are people that have been working for 10 years.
Right.
And they've gotten to the point where they are going to be moving into some sort of leadership or management position. And getting that degree is an important part of that. And I think maybe a lot of the people taking this course are setting themselves up for important, maybe technical leadership or maybe more general management leadership roles in their organization. It's an awful lot of things that they could take away from this talk. I found this really interesting. I know when I was a department head, I didn't know any of this stuff. That's why I was a lousy department head. So,
but we don't learn it as part of our technical training. So I think
that's right.
I would encourage your audience to really be mindful about both what I would call informal training, reading books, observing people, also formal training. Many organizations have opportunities for you to take courses in leadership, communication. Professional societies do, like the American Statistical Association. Also, I've spoken about leadership here, and you might think leadership by position. That's where you have a title. I'm an executive vice president. I have the tiara on my head, leader by position. There's also leadership by sort of just by action, if you will. Statisticians often find themselves in this role. You're part of a project team. You're not the principal investigator, but in some sense, you're the methodological leader.
Yes, you are.
And that's actually a more difficult position to be in, because you don't have that title or that clear scope of authority. But because of your unique capabilities,
your skill set,
you're the leader in that setting.
Right. And it's very important to understand that.
Right.
Let's look at this question, because this is kind of the discussion we're having is kind of leading into this.
Right.
Do you have any suggestions for books that would be helpful to continue learning after the course? Well, I've got one book that if you think you are moving into a leadership position, that I would
Okay.
highly recommend. And it's an old book. It was written by a guy named Robert Lehrer.
Okay.
And Bob Lehrer was head of the School of Industrial Engineering when I went to Georgia Tech as a new faculty member in 1969. And Bob's book is called The Management of Change.
Oh, yeah.
And it is an outstanding book,
Mhm.
full of a lot of real pearls of wisdom about
Yeah.
how to be an effective manager and how to make change happen in an organization without blowing it up.
Right. Right.
And I, of all the people that I have worked with over the years as a department head or a dean or whatever position in the academic world that I've been in, I thought Bob was the most effective.
Wow.
I thought he was the most effective. He took our program at Georgia Tech to become the largest undergraduate industrial engineering program in the country, and consistently made that program the #1 ranked program.
Wow.
And grew the graduate program, grew the graduate faculty, brought in people with a lot of different interests, and always managed to keep peace in the family. and that book is full of insights, and I highly recommend it to people. And you had a couple of recommendations
Yeah,
too, but I would add Bob's book to that
Right.
list.
Yeah. No, that sounds like a book I should read, because the issue of change management, which often new leaders have to
Mhm.
face that. They're sometimes going in to fix a situation, or
Right.
change just naturally has to happen. And
Right.
I think thinking about that very specifically is important. I put the Nordhaus book, which I like.
Mhm.
There's a recent book edited by Amanda Golbeck called Women, Leadership in Statistics.
Hmm.
Now, you may say, well, I'm not a woman in leadership, but it's actually a book that has a lot of interesting lessons for anyone
For everybody.
in
Yeah.
leadership,
Yeah.
I would say. So I also found, if anybody's moving from industry to academics, there's a book called Provost,
Oh,
which is just simply titled Provost. It's by Nielsen. You can find it on Amazon. And for a non-academic, it's from a provost perspective. Obviously, that's the title of the book. He is a provost, was at North Carolina State. But it really explains the academic culture. And for someone from outside
mhm.
academics, that was pretty important. That's an important thing. I use the word acumen in my talk, but understanding the culture of the place, and
Right.
particularly if you're moving sectors, that's an important thing to understand.
Yeah, very much so. And
Yeah.
so if you are, if you are setting your sights on a career in the management of your organization, some of these references are going to be
Mhm.
extremely useful. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of the things that you talked about are really important.
Mhm.
Now, if you're interested in learning more about techniques,
Mhm.
we could talk about that. Uh, for instance, a topic that is not covered in the course, but which is a very important topic, depending on the kind of industry you're in, is clinical trials.
Mhm.
There's nothing in my book on clinical trials. There's nothing in the course on clinical trials, and the reason for that is I know very little about clinical trials. It's not my area. But there are some excellent books on clinical trials, and I would, that would be an area that you could explore. Some of the topics that are covered in the course that you might want maybe more depth on. For example, we have a whole course on response surfaces, mixtures, and those sorts of topics. Well, I'm a co-author of a book that deals with response surfaces and mixtures, and that would be another place to go. There's also an older book on mixture experiments by the late John Cornell, which is a fabulous book. And by the way, you may not know this, but John and I were next door neighbors in graduate school. We had a common wall of our apartments, and John is a terrific golfer. And,
I didn't know that about him.
And we used to play golf all the time, because I used to be before arthritis set in, I used to be pretty good too. And John and I would play all the time, and it got to the point that maybe we weren't going to get finished because we kept playing so much golf. And finally, we got harassed by our significant others, and,
So focus on the
yeah,
dissertation.
we were forced to focus, and John beat me out of the trap, and he finished and went to Florida, and then I didn't have anything to play golf with, so I had to finish too. But John Cornell's book on mixtures is still, I think, the book.
Well, it's I'll put in a plug for our book, Methods in Comparative Effectiveness Research. I think the real issue in healthcare right now, I mean, you've got clinical trials, but you also have a plethora of observational data, whether those are patient records, administrative records. You can observe because of data availability.
Right.
How do you combine those two things? Can you combine experimental with observational data? It's actually a very, very interesting question. And in our book, Methods in Comparative Effectiveness Research, we talk about different data sources. And we also talk about meta-analysis and the latest in meta-analysis.
And those kinds of opportunities come up in the industrial world a lot, because you've got historical experience with this process. You've been doing statistical process control on this thing for years. And so you have all sorts of data about performance. Now you want to go in and run a designed experiment to try to improve performance. So now the classic example of what you're talking about.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that would be another interesting area to explore. You may be going off into the world of doing analysis of time-oriented data. Most everything we talk about in our course it's taking place at one fixed point in time. This experiment is being run right now, but there are many places where you deal with time-oriented data, and so there's a vast collection of books and articles on time-oriented data, and there are even some papers that have been written about running designed experiments where the response outcomes are time series. And so those are things that I would urge you to look into. Now, I'll plug my own book. I'm a co-author of a book on time series analysis. I'd be amiss to my own co-authors if I didn't recommend that. But there are other books on time series analysis, and as I say, papers. I've seen actually some papers where the response variable in the experiment is a time series, and that's a very interesting problem. I think there are other areas. We talk very little about reliability and life testing in this course, but that's an area where there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And a good place to start might be the book on reliability by Bill Meeker and Luis Escobar. That's a great book. There's another little easier to understand book by two guys named Tobias and Trindade on reliability. I don't know if you know either of those guys or not, but they're both ex-IBMers. And Paul Tobias was with Sematech for a lot of years after he left IBM. But that we've used that book as a textbook here, and I think that's a very easy to understand textbook for somebody that's sort of moving into that field. Okay, so question 2.
That's a
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, this is not just statistics. This is many fields of science.
Right.
This is many fields of science, and that's I don't know. I guess I look at it this way: is you're never through.
Read the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I forgot to read the question. Oh, duh. Okay. The managers here are reminding me to read the question. How do we manage expectations about statisticians having to know a lot of statistical topics, especially when we specialize in one area in our doctoral studies? As I started to say, this is a common problem, not in statistics, but in probably all fields of science and engineering. And all I can tell you is you have to keep learning. The day they hand you that doctoral diploma or that master's or whatever, if you think you're done, you're dead. You're not going anywhere. You have to keep learning, and there are a lot of ways to do that.
I would say that the question that I always dread is when someone walks up to me and says, I have a really easy question in statistics. I
Yes.
know we're in trouble right off the bat.
Yeah.
So I guess in response, I would agree with Doug. You've got to keep learning. The second thing is be honest about what you know and what you don't know.
Right.
And then the third thing is the basic ideas of statistics, bias and variance, how are the data generated, what is the design, are common to any setting. And often when you find yourself just asking those questions, you may be able to provide some important, perhaps basic, but important advice to the person. So, yeah. And also, well, I would just say the following. I would also say to Doug, I've become kind of an expert in meta-analysis. I never learned that in graduate school. So that's an example of learning something in my own career where actually that's what I focused on for most of my career.
Yeah. Well, I know the same thing. In my academic work, I never took a single course in time series. Nothing. I knew nothing about it. But when I got out into the world as an academic, I found myself, first of all, having to teach a course at Georgia Tech, where some part of that course had to do with forecasting, because it was a course in production planning, and you can't do production planning without forecast. So I had to start learning how to do that, and you know, eventually I got to be pretty good at it. But you just have to keep plugging away and learning. I loved what you said about the people that walk up to you and say that they have an easy statistics question. My analogy to that is I get a phone call that says, we've run this designed experiment and we need some help analyzing the data.
Yeah, that's a bad.
Because the thing is, you know that if they had done this correctly, the analysis is easy.
Right.
You know, you pull down the menus on Jump and you plug in the numbers, and you know the guys at Jump and SAS take care of you. But the reason they're calling you is because they want somebody to sprinkle some magic statistics dust.
Or that I've had the common one. You know, we have 75% missing data. What can we do?
Yeah.
Well, really nothing. I mean, that so you want to be at the beginning. I think that's a piece of advice. You want to be at the beginning of the question and the design, which is why your course is so important.
Well, in the course, we talk about something that's in the first chapter of my design book, and that's a 7-step process for planning, conducting, and analyzing experiments. And the first 3 steps are: what is the problem, what are the factors, the levels, the ranges, and what's the response, and how you're going to measure it. And I always tell people that that's the most important part of the entire project. And Charles Hicks, I don't know if you ever knew Charles Hicks or not, but he was a math prof at Purdue. And he taught a course on experimental design. And he actually had a tiny little book on design principles, very nice book. But Charlie Hicks used to tell his students that if you had 10 weeks to solve a problem with a design experiment, you should spend 8 weeks planning it, 1 week running it, and 1 week analyzing the data. And you know, that's just really good advice for just about any kind of statistics or any kind of problem that you're going to run into.
Actually, when I began my career at Rand, I overlapped with Bill Rogers, who wrote Stata, as you may know, recently died. And this is a long time ago, 30 years ago. And when we were talking about projects and trying to design them, he would actually generate data that he thought would look like the data that would come out of whatever. We did a lot of primary data collection, and then set up the analysis plan on those generated data. I'd never seen that done before. It's a lot more common here, but really thinking through the entire process and then coming back and saying, maybe we should design in this way. Learned a lot from him.
Yeah, I have done that with consulting clients quite a bit. You know, before they go off and run this thing, why don't we make up some data and see what we think is going to happen. And then we can see if we can analyze it. And if we get lucky, we guessed right. Yeah, but I think it's a great idea.
Right.
I think it's a great idea.
Actually, at Rand, I'll just tell one more story. We were always taught as the project, even when we were bidding the project to get federal funding, we would have a conversation with the communications folks at RAND. What would the headline look like from this project? What is the possible outcome, to try to think through how the policy recommendations might be spun from a political, because they're really thinking through the whole, doing that thought experiment again is pretty important. Another question.
Another question. This question pertains to fundamental biochemical research experiments where the objective is to establish a cause-effect relationship between the predictor and response variables. Okay. How can I incorporate the scientific controls into factorial design for experiments, trying to establish a causal relationship between the predictor variables and the response variables? Should the scientific control, factor 0, be used as one of the levels in such experimental designs, or should I create a separate experimental design containing one scientific control run corresponding to each run in the original factorial design? Well, you know, I tend to think that you can have a separate factor or treatment level that is the control, and we do that a lot in industrial experiments, and I think it also happens a lot in health care. Yeah. For example, I've seen clinical trials where one level of the factor or factors that they're studying is in fact the standard treatment.
Right.
And then they're comparing that to other treatment levels. So I tend to approach this by thinking that this is you treat this as a separate factor, as an additional factor. I shouldn't say a separate factor, but as an additional factor in the experiment. That would be my general approach to doing this.
It would be mine as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Good question. Oh,
what is
big crisis? What is the big crisis that we currently face today in the context of statistics? Well, we're overwhelmed with data. That's part of it. And I think my own prejudice here. Okay, because I live in a school where the bulk of the faculty in that school are computer science people, and they reinvent the wheel.
Yep.
Yeah, there are people out there that know no statistics that are reinventing the wheel and are, you know, doing things that this are, you know, in my view, are just almost criminal. I mean, Stu Hunter used to talk about what he called the democratization of statistics. Right. And it's a good thing, by the way. I mean, that people are learning more and more about statistics, but I think there's an issue that people that are not trained in some of the basic ideas are out inventing statistical tools.
Right. Sometimes incorrectly.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
The people that drive me nuts are the people that talk about machine learning. Yeah. Machines don't learn. All they can do is what you've programmed them to do. So even that they invent terminology, which drives me crazy. Anyway.
So I guess I think similarly. I think it's really with the increase in data science and the capability, the plethora of data,
which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. The tools that are available, people can just push a button, right? And something happens on the screen that they don't fully understand. It's imperative that the statistical profession be part of those discussions, part of that education. Yep. I think there have been some high profile examples where lack of statistical thinking has gotten kind of the just do the data science people in trouble. The thing that I often see is no understanding of how the data are generated.
Oh, yes.
So bring data forward. I'm like, well, is it an experiment? Is it observation? They don't even know that distinction. So I think it's imperative that statisticians lead in this setting, be part of those conversations so that we are part of data science curriculums. I think that is happening. Our professional societies like the American Statistical Association and others are at the table when these curricula are being developed. I think inside every person is a statistician.
Somewhere.
Yep. You'd be surprised. People think statistically. They think about probabilities, and we just need to bring that statistician out and help him or her be as educated as possible about statistics. But statistics is going to become more and more important. Actually, the pandemic put it in everybody's mailbox, on everybody's Twitter feed, on everybody's news feed. Modeling, COVID modeling. What does this mean? I mean, we were front and center.
Mhm.
And so if I think crisis, I think it's us being, we're not always a discipline that really steps forward, and we need to.
H.G. Wells wrote in the early 1900s a statement that I've always enjoyed, and he wrote that he thought the time would come when a knowledge of statistics in a civilized society would be as important as the ability to read and write.
Yep. Yep.
And that was 100 years ago.
Right.
And it's more true today than it was 100 years ago.
I actually thought it would never happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
We would be so much at the forefront, but we are.
Yeah.
And people, I've heard a lot of debate, is it data science? I mean, on my website, it says I'm a statistician and a data scientist. I'm just going to embrace it if that means I can be at the table to have an impact.
Well, I don't know what I am, because all of my degrees are in engineering. Okay, but fortunately, I fell under the influence of Ray Myers at Virginia Tech, and Ray was a chemical engineer who ended up getting his PhD in statistics, and I didn't get my PhD in statistics. There's kind of a funny story about that. You'll love this. When I went back to graduate school, I had a part-time lecturer's job. I was a part-time instructor because I was a little more mature. I'd gotten out of the Navy, and anyway, the deal was that I could work on my master's degree, which I did, and I finished the master's degree. And so now I was thinking about actually going back to industry, because I had a part-time job when I was an undergrad with a division of Union Carbide, and they offered me an opportunity to go back to Carbide. But then the department came along and said, well, you can stick around as a part-time instructor and go into the PhD program. And we have this wonderful Ford Foundation forgivable loan, $5,000 a year tax-free if you'll do the PhD. And you only have to, you pay it back by teaching or working for one of the national labs. And it's a 1-for-1 deal. For every $5,000 you do a year. And I said, boy, that's really an incredible deal, because I would be making a lot more money than the graduate BS engineer, and half of it would be tax-free. Whoa. So I'm about to sign on to do this. And one of my advisors then was a guy named Dick Leavenworth, Richard Leavenworth, Stanford graduate, revised the grant quality control book. Grant Leavenworth is a good guy. And he grabbed me and he said, you should not stay here. You have all 3 of your degrees from the same place. He said, go someplace else. And I said, well, where should I go? And he said, go to Stanford. He went to Stanford. So I applied to Stanford. Oh, I got in. I was amazed. I went out and looked around. I can't afford to live there. Can't do it. So I come back and I tell Dick that this is not going to work. And he said, well, I don't want you to go to some nasty, bad place. And he mentioned a few nasty, bad places. I didn't want to do that either. And I said, well, what if I change fields? What if I get my PhD in statistics? He said, that'd be fine. So I go over and talk to Ray, and I remember this, forever. I knock on his door and he's in there. And I said, Dr. Myers, I need career advice. And so I explained the whole deal, and so finally I said, so can I get in the program in statistics, and will you be my advisor? He looked up at me, he's sitting behind his desk, and he said, hell no. He said, what are you thinking? He said, stay in engineering, you make more money. So I went back and told the department that, and they said, you can stay. So that's how I ended up in engineering. But I took lots of courses in stats. And so I'm sort of an amateur statistician. Okay, we are done with our question period. Okay. We're going to come back in the fall. We are tentatively planning, I think, for mid-August will be the first course, and the first Fireside Chat. And I want to thank you all for joining us for our fireside chats this year. I've had a lot of fun doing them. I've had some wonderful guests. Sally, I really appreciate you taking time to come and do this. And we'll be doing more of this. And I hope you guys continue to have lots of enjoyment with the course.
Thank you.